So it's 12:30. It's Friday. It must be crackerjack. Oh no! Actually, I joke with that. I was on a meeting earlier in the week and made some similar reference to another children's TV program, Bagpuss, that used to be around, and realised that in all of these years, as I've aged, well, I'd like to believe gracefully, my hair's got grey, and nothing's really started to faze me about it until I realised that comments about Crackerjack and Bagpuss now have a increasingly limited understanding amongst the audiences. So maybe I should refrain from that. But what it is at 12:30 on Friday is Data Clancast, back after a brief sojourn, on my part at least, to sunny Crete. So it's really nice to be back. For our regulars, you'll notice that since our last time, the hammock's gone. There's no more hammock or spear in the background here, although you'll be pleased to know that we still have Shay over my left shoulder. And very relevant for today, we have our multicolored elephant over my right shoulder, and we'll be talking more about that later. So I think probably anybody listening into this has some idea about DataClan, but you know, we're really here because we realized last year during the pandemic that there's a real value in taking a range of perspectives when we're looking at the kinds of challenges that face businesses. And so I'm delighted today to be joined by our regular team of experts and also Matt Jollens today. So welcome, Matt.
Hi there.
What I'd like to do really to get this going is to hand over to our change expert, Rob. And perhaps, Rob, you can talk us through a little bit of how we can frame this conversation about change.
Yeah, thanks. Right. So, how are you doing, everybody? So, as always, what we like to do is what seems like a very well rehearsed but free-flowing discussion is going to be today we're going to hopefully get a bit of kind of feedback from Matt as well. But what I want to do is we're rather tenuously leveraging the Halloween theme, as you might have seen in the social media post. And what we want to really do is, and please forgive the kind of the tenuous links here, but we wanted to look really at the sort of trick and treat of business change, and in particular, just to understand what kind of mechanisms, and from the perspectives of our panel, and also from our from our wider partners around what the imperatives for change are in business. What the outputs are at the other end of that, but critically, what's the bridge that gets us there? So what I wanted to do, and if I can manage just to share my screen, oops, that's wrong. Let's see if that's the right thing. So if I just, hold on. So what I wanted to, hang on, bear with me for a second. Yeah, that's a bit better. So what I wanted to kind of look at, first of all, is from a kind of trick perspective. I just wanted to call out a couple of things that you might recognise, and this is just to help frame that sort of thing. Now, people talk about tricks of the trade, but also things that seem one thing and can end up being another. So quite often, the sort of single issue focus that organisations have can lead to a myopic way of looking at business changes in the round. And what we mean by that really is that there's a bit of an illusion around being able to, the silver bullet, you know, we want to be able to have digital and technological advancement and so on, and have online presence and be able to deliver our services in a more modern and digital way. And obviously the COVID pandemic has helped accelerate that. But really it's taking those issues just in a myopic way and just looking at this. Once we get the CRM, all of our problems will be solved. And I'm sure Matt will recognise some of these challenges around that. The other thing that is related to that on the kind of clock of lenses, and one of the things that DataClan tries to do, and which is why we've got all of you guys here today, is to try to understand how these things operate from different perspectives. And it's through those different perspectives that you get a slightly more holistic insight. So the other thing to bear in mind here is around about misaligned culture. So again, you'll probably recognise some of this, and certainly our DataClan colleagues will, but while you've got very good tech, or you've got very good strong processes, and you have lean processes, or you have very strong data, the interdependencies of these are sometimes quite strongly overlooked. And the critical part of that is about cultural alignment. And particularly the kind of, as it says there, the frustrating rhetoric behind saying things are going to be successful, and actually the practical application of those as part of your change programs. And then lastly, I put in their scary KPIs. Now, as we know, 165 key performance indicators is an oxymoron. People have heard me say that quite a lot. And Matt in particular will recognise the vast jorums of KPIs that get pushed, that he has his team produces, but also people need to move, I think, and we'll talk about in a second, move towards more of that. When you see this, what do? You know, how are we translating that information and that data into actionable insight? But having said that, there's also the other side of the tenuous metaphor for Halloween is the treat. So we also through some of our engagements with our partners, have seen some real pockets and waves of innovation and some really strong outputs with a lot of kind of business benefit in return, particularly where you're converting data into decisions. And that's not just in theoretical strategy terms, but it's also in actual practical operational service delivery. So what we really want to do is it's a combination of the real world application. So how do we make sure that what we're doing is translating the devices and utilizing those techniques and devices of business change and get into real actionable operational insight? How do you create continuous improvement as a business as usual kind of mindset? And a key part of that is the last thing that's really on that slide there, which talks about capability building. So quite often individual, and I use S word, siloed teams quite often will operate where you have a very high capability in one area, and particularly in broad spectrum organizations and at scale, you have different departments and who perform differently and have different levels of capability. But as Chris has pointed out in a number of sessions that we've run over the years, low capability in one area and high capability in another equals low capability everywhere. So that was just the sort of thought I wanted just to leave you with on there. The last thing, if everybody can see this slide, this is affectionately become known in DataClan circles and wider partners of DataClan as the white elephant slide, so called because it has a white elephant. Now, it was, I can't remember if it's by design or by accident, but the elephant in the room really is this thing that obscures where you want to get for your optimized customer experience. So if you imagine you in the bottom corner there, with all your ambition, experience, and so on, and they've got these imperatives for change. And this is the last slide. This is what I just wanted just to invite people to reflect on. What we've got there are the imperatives. So in the case of Matt, we'll also recognize this HCA compliance, but and so will Michael and some of the others who have joined us. But building safety is another strong imperative, the effect of Grenfell and the knock-on effect in building safety. Obviously, the pandemic goes without saying, everything's affected, and opportunities are created in that sense. And Chris's pièce de résistance, data quality. So you know, you can have the best kit in the world and the best people in the world, but if your data is poor, then you know, it's a mainstay complaint. At the opposite end of the chart, you've got that customer experience, and you can see from that list that that everything from service excellence to increasing social value, organizational design, mentioned data to decisions, as you kind of create actionable insight, and also having a consumer voice and choice, which goes beyond the rhetoric. How do you asking your customers what they want and then delivering against that, rather than that just being a kind of tokenistic approach. In the middle there is really the bridge I mentioned at the beginning, and that's the kind of pillars, if you like, although it's a single pillar, but the plinths on that pillar, depends which way you look at the chart. Cultural alignment, data literacy we mentioned. Again, we've got Claire Murray, our resident psychologist, Dr. Murray, and she works and will maybe reflect a little bit on team cohesion and the effect of that cultural alignment and mindset in being able to deliver effective business change. And again, looking at the challenges around modern construction and also particularly with the pandemic workplace strategy. So I'll just leave it there. What I wanted to do now, as always, is just to, I'm going to hand back to Chris, and we're just going to see if we can invite people just to reflect on stuff, and I'll just unshare.
Thanks, Rob. I think that's really helpfully set the scene. So I know the DataClan team here have probably got a lot to say, but Matt, if you don't mind, I'd love to come to you first, really. I know we've worked with you in former lives a little bit, and so you know a little bit about our approach, but obviously, what you see being on the inside is sometimes different and very valuable. So what are your thoughts? What's what made you think about, or I hope no money has changed hands here, by the way, so please be very frank and honest.
I have been promised a pint, but that the white elephant slide there, I mean, is like Rob said, is a perfect example of the journey and sort of the imperatives for change. So I mean, like you say, in a former life, our imperative for change was sort of looking at data quality, and you sort of, it's quite a sort of a narrow focus. You say the thing that is the problem for our business is the quality of the information that we hold. And as you sort of start working through that, which we did with with Chris and Rob, you start going, okay, well, it's the data quality is a sort of an artifact of a business culture that sort of doesn't value the data. It is an artifact of a lack of alignment between strategy and outcome. And we've got a lot of people recording things or not in a way that doesn't necessarily make any sense for the sort of the stated strategy of the business, because what your individual action, how your individual action relates to that wider picture isn't sort of clearly elucidated. So that the bit that I was thinking about really was that, you've got your imperative for change, but that imperative for change probably points to a wider range of issues. It might not be all of the issues, it might be just some, but it comes down to that thing of saying our culture needs to value the customer experience at this end, and in order to get to that customer experience, you need to do all the boring, the unsexy, the stuff that's not going to get you. You're not going to get a big award for sorting out your databases or for making sure that people record phone numbers correctly, but you can't get the rewards without doing that stuff. And I think that's the thing, that's the sort of where the skill is required, and where the skill doesn't really exist in a lot of places, and you really need people to sort of flow through and help you understand and help you create actions that build the bridge to go back to Rob's analogy as sort of the bridging bit. I don't know.
Yeah, that's great. Really interesting, Matt. You remind me, I was teaching on an educational webinar earlier in the week, and I was teaching about data.
Yeah.
And one of the participants asked a question, and their question was, is there any way that we can make data interesting? And I was like, well, thanks. Thanks for the feedback. That was unsolicited, but you're right. I mean, it's important, but it's often not seen as the sexy thing to do, is it? No, I could totally see that.
It's seen as like an esoteric interest that nerds are interested in, not real people. And I was like, the way that I always tried to approach it was almost to remove the discussion of data from the data, because people, when you say data, it turns people off because they go, well, I don't know how to use Excel. Sidebar, you shouldn't necessarily be using Excel, but I don't know I don't understand how a database works. I don't understand what this parameter means, but that doesn't really matter. Right? If you think about the core reason for doing data, for doing business change, is to improve the outcome for the customer that you're serving.
And you mentioned, I want to play it in a minute, but one more question, Matt. You mentioned with the data quality driver that we had in the previous life, that when we unpick that a little bit, culture turned out to be perhaps the underlying problem. Do you think culture is always the underlying problem, almost irrespective of what the driver is, or do you think it could be other things as well?
I think culture sort of maybe covers a multitude of sins, doesn't it? In terms of but it would always be that you're not, that it'll be I think it's the lack of strategic alignment with outcome and action, and that could be driven by culture. It could just be driven by sort of a lack of clarity, but fundamentally That would be my opinion. It
Yes.
might be wrong. I feel very, I'm talking in front of people that know far more than I do.
It's possibly an illusion, Matt, but never mind. But one person that certainly knows far more than I do about this is Claire. So Claire, perhaps picking up on some of the things that Matt's highlighted there, as well as Rob's context. I know you've done a lot of work in organisations around culture and some of this multitude of sins, as Matt puts it. What are your thoughts?
So, I mean, I'm just going back to what we were saying earlier about building the bridge. And I suppose, ultimately, who's building the bridge? It's the people. And there are a number of points that you made, Matt, which I thought was really interesting. And a lot of our client works, I'm doing a lot of work with Kingfisher at the moment with their digital board. And there's a big push towards gathering more information or more data. And I think, given where we are now, sort of post-pandemic, just coming out into the next normal, what is absolutely critical for all organisations is trust. So if you're trying to drive change, then the people have got to trust that it's the right change, and they need to know why. So, and we've talked a lot about in my project with Kingfish about creating stories around data. So helping people see the impact of gathering that information on customer experience, for example. So giving people the whole story rather than just little bits. And I think because so much has been out of our control over the last 18 months, that the more people feel involved, consulted, the easier it is to shift that mindset. And that there will be some pockets of resistance. So understanding the kind of psychology of change and what helps people cross that bridge. Some people are more open to change than others. So how do we harness that and really kind of step up the momentum? But ultimately, like I said before, and it's never been as important as it is now, is trust.
That's great, Claire. I wonder whether I can ask you a kind of follow-on question to that. So one of the things about change is that it goes wrong quite often, right? I mean, if you try and do anything, then there's parts of it or cases in which it's not going to work, or at least not go the way you expected it to. And I wonder, Claire, in your experience, the degree to which failing or the fear of failing plays into this kind of conversation around change.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think people's appetite for change is obviously different across the organisation, and perhaps a kind of anticipation or an acceptance that actually some of what we're trying to do might not work, but then building in what we call a win-learn mindset. So, okay, things go wrong, but is there a culture of let's learn from our mistakes, or is there a culture of fear where I can't make a mistake, otherwise I'll get blamed and scapegoated? And so again, it's a cultural thing. And again, it relates to trust. So making sure that we perhaps break down the change journey into small steps so that people are clear, and then we can identify when things start to go wrong earlier. But that all, I think, underpins, how people work, how we work with each other in the organisation. So, can I accept responsibility when perhaps something I've done has gone wrong? Are we open to working with people with difference, in terms of strengths? So another part of my change work that I do is helping people who are driving the change understand better what their strengths are and how they can leverage those strengths in a changing environment, rather than getting people to focus on what I'm not good at, because that adds another layer of anxiety. So if we create this sense of, I know what I'm good at, I can use this in this way, still might mean that they have to make some small behaviour change, but it creates more of a sense of hope and optimism to help kind of weather the elements of the change that go wrong.
I think that's really interesting, because as I'm sure we've all seen, organisations, but particularly the kind of HR part of organisations, often have a mindset that says, when we do our performance reviews, for example, let's identify opportunities for development, right? That's it's continual development, growth kind of mindset. And there's nothing fundamentally wrong with that. But I think what you're calling out there, Claire, is that when we try and layer that in with significant change, you know, there's a capacity, right? I mean, you reach a limit, and sometimes you might be better saying, let's not try and worry about what skills you don't have. Let's just figure out what you do have and how they can help us make the change. And I love that win-learn as a kind of phrase. It's a great way of kind of couching really what the purpose of failure is, because failure, of course, is an essential part of business. It's not something to be avoided. You have to fail, otherwise you're doing nothing.
Yeah.
Certainly nothing ambitious. No, that's fantastic. Thank you for that. I'm kind of minded as you're talking about that, and perhaps Claire, just to finish up for now, I can. So you, William, and I are working together with the NHF Building Better Alliance at the moment, and one of the things that we're doing with them is really spanning a particular bridge for them between a new alliance of partners using modern methods of construction, both in terms of their need to collaborate in this completely new way, doing actually quite, I mean, MMC itself is not new, but it's quite new, that the scale at which we're now looking at doing it. And also a way of measuring and monitoring performance there. And I know, Claire, one of the tools that we're employing there is your strategic relationship management framework. I wonder whether you could just say a few words about that.
Yeah, so I developed this over the last few years as a result of a lot of my client projects all coming or asking for the same thing, which was how do we collaborate better, and set in the broader context of what's going on in the whole, across the whole of business, where we're seeing the need to collaborate in order to be more flexible, fast-paced, and also linking that with creativity and innovation. So we've heard that, you know, collaboration, innovation, but most businesses, or a lot of businesses, don't actually get it right. So as a result of that, I developed a strategic relationship model that contains 4 elements: rapport, which is about how to build trust and empathy; respect, which is about how to work with difference in whatever format; responsibility, which is about taking accountability, adopting a problem-solving approach to conflict; and then reflection, which is building in review or check-in sessions, where, as you would on a project around tasks, but doing kind of relationship checks, you know, how we're doing, is this working? And within each of those 4 elements, there are a number of behavioural indicators. So the idea is to equip organisations with the key behaviours that kind of underpin good collaboration and creativity, which is essentially creating that foundation of trust. And it's also a great way to use the framework to structure the review conversation, so that we've got a model. It's also a great way to identify perhaps where we're missing. So some people have said, well, actually rapport and respect, we've got the trust, we've got the respect, but we're not great at responsibility, or we need to build in a bit more reflection. So those review check-in sessions where we monitor the relationship, because of course relationships are fluid anyway, but when you're trying to drive change, the way people work together is likely to change over time as well. So it's a good benchmark, or a good base to work from.
Thanks, Claire. And that, I mean, it's worth saying that that's we had a workshop with the Alliance team there. When was that? A month ago or so? Yeah. A month ago, and it was received extremely well. There's been some great feedback on that. So let's hope we'll see the impact in the collaboration across that alliance in the coming weeks, months, and years. So Rob, we've talked a lot about kind of some of the challenges here, some of the things that we need to watch out for. I mean, how do we solve these problems? Come on, let's have it. Let's have the treat. I want the treat. No delayed gratification. Give it to me now.
Well, I think. Well, actually, I think that is quite. I think that's rather fortuitous that you should say that, because I think that business change and what people see down the road as being their sort of road to Damascus. What is it? You know, what's the end? What's the output of this? You know, what are we going to get for our money? What are we getting for our effort? And I think that gratification, that desire is absolutely fine. I mean, the drive and the ambition and the experience, and you are put in work, and I want, you know, we want the service to be better. I want the strategy to be smoother. I want the operations and customer satisfaction to be up. All of these different things. Whatever your your ambition or proclivity, or whatever you're aiming, what you're going to get out of this. And in Matt's case, I mean, he's got a pretty wide range. I'm picking on Matt just because there's a lot of plates spinning, and what his team does is trying to underpin the delivery of quite a lot of those things. I think where part of the answer lies in understanding, like Claire said, about role modeling and proof of concept. Now, I know this isn't a particularly new or innovative idea. I think that the key to it is that Rome wasn't really built in a day, and I think that what can sometimes frustrate or limit accelerated progress is because people have their eye on the prize and less of an eye on what the vehicle by which you get there. And I think that's where going back to what we were saying at the beginning, I think that's where capability comes in. I think that's about understanding the interdependence of all of those different factors, to make sure you've got, on your vehicle, all of the components of that are there. And I think the metaphor extends to the idea that you don't want, you can't, as this said in the past, you can't create a baby in a month and 9 women. There needs to be a sequence of events that allows to, there has to be time built in to allow you to achieve your objective. So I think having mapped out, having a framework and understanding those the kind of dependencies, if you like, is critical.
And so when we do that, and Claire talked about this as well, didn't she, about not being too ambitious in each step. But as Matt called out, and as you called out at the start, Rob, we're often faced when we're looking at a change that, even if initially it looks like it might be a fairly small change, once you dig at it a little bit, you realise that actually it's not small at all. What kind of techniques or process can we use, Rob, to help sequence those activities? Where should we start, or how do we figure out where to start?
Well, I mean, I think, and again, I mean, I keep picking on Matt. I mean, Matt will recognise this from the work that we've done in the past. I mean, I think that you have to understand and define the scale of your challenge. And I think, and as I said a second ago, I think you have to understand and diagnose the limitations and or opportunities for capability of your organisation to get there. As Claire pointed out, the most critical of those is the cement that holds it all together, which is the kind of cultural alignment and the cohesion of the team, up and down and across the organisation. I mean, I think that's critical. Quite often in very practical terms, you can have very high capability in team. I mean, Matt's got a lot of experience, for instance, working with data and pulling that and trying to translate that and helping shape strategy from that perspective. But if the people at the top of the organisation are aiming for a different target and are going in a different direction, then those two things are misaligned. So I think that the tools really there are to do it's really to diagnose the issue, to understand from everything from process down to culture, data quality, your digital platforms even, and to some extent your performance metrics, to make sure that all of those elements correspond in a model. And I think that the critical part of that is to then ensure that everybody is on the bus. And that's where the cultural alignment comes from. And I think that it needs to be scheduled and planned. I mean, as I said before, sequencing is key. What steps do you take first? And quite often things can happen simultaneously. But as we found in practice, when we've been helping other clients and partners.
Please.
No,
I
please.
was just going to say, and I completely agree with you. Some great points there, Rob. And I think, my experience when I've worked with organisations and change hasn't worked, it's usually the need for change, it suddenly becomes almost like a crisis. You've got to do it now, change now, do now. And so then there's a risk then that you have to get the pace right. You can't, if you try and push through too much change too quickly, people go into flight or freeze mode. So I think, again, the pace, we've got to think about the pace and what's realistic. And that's getting what you said, Matt, right, the link between strategy and implementation. You can have a strategy, but it's got to be realistic in terms of the pace and the impact that's going to have on people.
And I think it's interesting you say that, getting the pace right. That's not always about going slowly enough. Sometimes it's going quickly enough. I mean, we actually have exactly this with the Building Better Alliance, don't we? They have a real appetite to get moving. And one of the concerns that they expressed to us was, we need to keep this to be pacey, otherwise people will actually lose interest. And so getting that balance right between fast enough that it's like people kind of stay on board with the change and don't lose interest, but slow enough that people can actually adapt and grow with the change and not feel frightened, or too frightened. I mean, I guess there's an almost inevitable degree of fear with any change, but you want that to be a reasonable level, I suppose. No, that's fascinating. I don't know, Matt, listening to this, I mean, and we've not spoken since you've taken your new role, so I don't know exactly how that's going. So feel free to share a bit about that if you want to. But what are you hearing in this that kind of from your perspective on the inside of an organization is useful, and what is it that you might challenge or have curiosity about?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things. I think there was mention earlier about going back to sort of, do we learn from our mistakes, or do we blame, or do we practice the blame culture? And I think there is the bit that needs always addressing is that people will, you'll get buy-in that there is a need for change, and you'll get buy-in that we're going to have to sort of break some stuff in order to get to where we want to go. But sometimes there is a need to really help people along on that journey, because as you do break stuff, as you do come across further issues, it does take it takes a lot of negotiation. It takes a lot of skill to sort of maintain people on that course while things are going wrong, or while you're uncovering something that maybe is a little bit uncomfortable for the person running an area, the person running a business, the person just doing a process. Because I mean, my current role is sort of very similar to my last role, but it's a lot more around how we translate that data into operational activity. So it's right, going back to the start there, is actually Rob mentioned, is that thing of saying we're going to data inform decision making, we're going to look at what we're doing, where we're falling down, how we move forward. So it's that sort of constant change and that constant thing of saying, I will take on board what I know to be, and we might make a change, we'll monitor it and we'll see that it's wrong, and we'll have to go back over it again. And not being afraid of that, I don't know. I mean, I'm thinking about, Facebook, Meta, love them or loathe them, their history is littered with crap cul-de-sacs, and to get to where they are now, to get to being able to instigate the invasion of the Capitol buildings, and you've just got to be aware that you might use Farmville for 6 months and then have to dump it off, but you tried, it wasn't what you were looking for.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think in the interest of transparency, other inciters to violence are available. So Rob, I mean, we're coming into the last 10 minutes or so today, and I just wondered whether you wanted to collect together some of the things that we've been hearing, and perhaps start to leave us with some things that we might want to do. What are the actions we can take now, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are two key things. I think the conversation has been really interesting as always, and I think and it's delighted to have Matt's insight. And I think really what he said just now, I think really resonates. And it's all. And the other thing is, it's good to hear it described by other people in a different situation. And I think that it's that difference in perspective. And learning, understanding from other people's perspective and what their ambitions are. And I think that one of the things that I've certainly enjoyed working with all of you, and in that kind of role, and I think this probably translates to Matt's as well, is that because of the nature of the role and looking at information, you are in effect supporting, in some respects. I mean, maybe this is an illusion that everybody thinks that they're at the centre, and maybe that's part of the issue. But there is no question that data, at least, and information, at least, is going out in all directions and is utilised to support people's arguments. And DataClan is kind of founded on the whole principle that we are trying to take an evidence base and understand things better and change things for the better, or understand how to not make mistakes. So I think the two things that come about, the first thing is the learning aspect. I think the freedom to fail and innovate. And you mentioned Meta and Facebook and so on. And I think that, and one of the things that always comes up in these conversations is this is where it goes wrong. And I think that, without sounding too consultancy, I think, every complaint is a nugget of gold kind of thing. I think there is some stock in the kind of philosophy that the idea that, anybody who hasn't made a mistake has probably not really made anything. And I think that that sort of philosophy is useful. I think also that Matt touched on, which is related to that, is that it is about learning, not about pointing the finger and a blame culture and this doesn't work because of something else. And it's through that process that you eliminate. So I think that the first thought I would kind of leave everybody with is that idea of the freedom to fail thing. How do you kind of learn from your mistakes and drive change in a practical sense? And again, that stems back to information. I think the second thing really is what I mentioned before, and Claire was talking around the kind of the trust and kind of and as a capability. And I don't want to sort of devalue these things or because obviously there's links between emotion and practical capabilities and so on. But just the idea that you will have to operate as a cohesive team. And I think the only way to do that is really to be sitting around a table, understanding where the gaps are, understanding where it is that you want the vehicle to get to, and understanding where there are synergies between what people can do to support that. And I think that, I would invite anybody listening, and, and we're talking to Matt and have worked with him in the past and others, to do precisely that, sometimes holding up the mirror to yourself as an organisation, or in fact, one of the only reasons that DataClan exists is because people sometimes need someone from outside to kind of step up and say, this is what it looks like from our perspective, but at the same time has that kind of shared ambition to make it work.
Fantastic, thank you, Rob. So I think we'll wrap up there. I'd like to absolutely thank our normal panel of experts and Matt, especially for joining us today. Thank you. Takeaways, by the sounds of it, are make sure there's a freedom to fail, and let's get some real capability around trust. So if there's two things to focus on, they are they. I will be hopefully seeing you all again in 2 weeks' time for our next Plancast on the 12th of November. Same bat time, same bat place. That's a cultural reference that's still valid, so I'm going to go with that one. And all that remains, therefore, is for me to wish everybody a very good weekend and hopefully see you soon. You know where we are if you have any questions.